Mathematician invented algebra. And another one invented the zero. Now, that number zero, that's a really important number because, folk, it's the center of all numbers. Without the number zero, you cannot have complex mathematics.
So you said they invented the number zero?
They invented, yeah, an Iranian mathematician invented the number zero.
Did they not have anything?
About the year, what's that?
Did they not have anything before that?
All right, well, before that, they used what we call Roman numerals. All right, I'm going to demonstrate. In Roman numerals, xi plus, all right, add that together and you get, anybody know how I did that? I did it in my head. You really cannot have, you cannot do addition and subtraction. All right, I'm going to try this one. X divided by x equals I. Again, anybody know how I did that? You can't do it. You really can't. Now, at one time, when a general wanted to divide his loot among his troops, he'd have to call in a mathematician, a team of them, and they would work with an abacus and work all night long and way into the following day to figure out how to divide equally amongst a bunch of loot among troops. They didn't have the zero. Again, yeah, they didn't know the concept of zero. Without the zero, there's a limit to, they didn't think of zero as a number. I mean, to them, zero is an absence of a number. Well, actually, the number zero is the central point of all numbers, and all numbers go in two directions zero, a positive and a negative. Hopefully, all of you know what I'm talking about. When you ever taken
back then, if you had nothing, you didn't say you had $0.
You had $0, you had nothing. You know, they just looked at zero as being the absence of a number.
Okay.
Yeah, that zero is, but we look on zero as a real number, the central point of all numbers, and numbers go in two directions out from the number zero. Again, all of you hopefully can follow what I'm saying if you studied your mathematics. So they invented the zero, and they invented algebra. And again, some of you might have taken algebra in high school, or if you go far in college, you'll wind up taking some form of algebra. But after that, now, it wasn't because Muhammad did not want them to learn. In fact, folk, the first 300 or 400 years of their existence, the Islamic scientists were far ahead of Europeans, particularly in two important fields, astronomy and medicine. In the field of astronomy, though, they actually were heirs to the ancient Middle Eastern astronomers that gave them a little bit of an edge over Europeans, which were not. In medicine, well, again, a lot of their medicine was a legacy. But as time went on, I mean, hey, you all have heard of this proverbial story of the race between the rabbit and the turtle. The rabbit started out so far ahead, the turtle kept chugging along. The turtle won the race because the rabbit decided to pull over on the side of the trail and sleep. Old story from ancient times. In this race between rabbit and turtle, Islam was the rabbit, and they stopped making progress around the year 1000. And their society just lagged and lagged and lagged while Europeans went on to invent. They invented better cannon, and eventually went on to invent the compass, the astrolabe, and from there they began to invent the telephone, the telegraph, where the telegraph came first, the railroad, the internal combustion engine, and that led to the airplane, the radio, the television, the computer. All that time that the Westerners were inventing these numerous gadgets, this part of the world was sitting there wondering, why has Allah left us behind? How come they can do it and we can't? Well, I'll tell you why they can't. They suppress a very high percentage of their population. All right, if I'm wrong, the floor is open. You're welcome to speak up. Yes?
Didn't the Mongols destroy like many Islamic cities?
The what?
Didn't the Mongol invasions?
You're jumping ahead of me. I was about to, the Mongols came in. And yeah, they did set the Islamic world back. Actually now, the Mongols came in led by Genghis Khan. There have been several Mongolian invasions of the West throughout history. The last one was in the 1100s led by Genghis Khan, and they overpowered this region and would have wiped Islam off the face of the earth. Except for one thing, they converted Islam. So, but they just did a lot to destroy a lot of Islamic wealth, but they eventually converted, and also they could not penetrate very far into Europe. They did fight a Polish army, but then Genghis Khan died and their troops were called home. They did conquer Russia and held it for about 200 years. And they got a little bit past Russia, but they, again, you jumped ahead on me in the story a little bit. About the personal life of Muhammad, you will probably eventually hear, if you haven't heard already, that he is alleged to have married a 9-year-old girl. I want to say, with all fairness to him, now, this practice was not uncommon in that part of the world at the time. Now, here in America, we frown on it, it's illegal. But in India, they did this quite often. In this part of the world, what you have to remember, folks, is life was so much shorter then than it is now. When the average age, the average lifespan was only about 28, 29 years, young girls often married at 11 or 12, 9 a little bit young even by that time, but it was not unheard of. And he married a 9-year-old girl, and they lived together. Well, actually, let me back up a little bit. His first marriage was to his wealthy wife, who she was much older than he was, but he remained faithful to her as long as she lived. When she died, he took on several wives. Now, again, Islamic rule allows a man to have up to 4 wives, but women can only have 1 husband. But he took on several wives, including this 9-year-old girl. When she died, he died shortly thereafter. Some people believe that her death hastened his, that he died of a broken heart shortly after she passed on. But again, if you haven't heard this already, you will hear all of it. But in his defense, it must be said, this was not unheard of, even among Europeans. This practice went on at the time period we're talking about. All right, again, there are many and numerous beliefs they have that can be, oh yes, Abu Bakr set up a system of laws that the Islamic people called Sharia. In modern times, Sharia law tended to be downplayed until very recently. Now, the ISIS people you're hearing about in the news lately, they're going by Sharia law. Sharia law, among other things, says that women who commit adultery should be stoned. And this practice would be still going on. There are, from time to time, you'll hear about it. The women who commit adultery should be stoned. But again, this practice is brought under fire with a lot of the rest of the world, because the men who do the same thing are not stoned. Or it's not frowned on so much among men as it is among women. Another thing about Sharia law is no Islamic person may convert to any other religion on pain of, again, stoning. Now, this makes news from time to time. There was a man in Afghanistan, I believe, who converted from Islam to Christianity. He was threatened, but the Italian government said, hey, bring him here to Italy and we'll let him live out the rest of his life here in Italy. But you must never, in other words, they guarantee once you converted to Islam, you and your children are considered Islamic forever and ever and ever. Again, no provision for any kind of change. I will say this, in the 20th and 21st century, more people have converted out of Islam than in all the other centuries before combined. Somehow or another, the influence of other religions is making its inroads felt. And again, you can give all kinds of reasons why that is. For one thing, we have better means of communication. Islamic people, More of them have radios, televisions, computers, and the message that's of other religions is getting to them, and it is having some effect on them. The Islamic world was ignored by much of the rest of the world for hundreds of years. After they conquered Constantinople, they tried to make headway into Europe, and as recently as, it may not sound recent to you, but as recently as 1680, or 34 years ago, they actually went to Vienna and were about to conquer Vienna, but Europeans rose up, Polish army came in, and armies from a lot of the rest of Europe came in and drove them out. And then the technology went strongly in favor of the Europeans. Europeans developed better cannon, better rifles, then the railroad, better methods of making iron and better methods of making steel. And the Islamic people just simply were lagged. Then the Islamic nations were all conquered during the European expansion. And with the possible exception of Morocco, every Islamic nation has been conquered in modern times. Egypt was conquered by Britain. This area here was conquered by Britain. The French conquered this region right in here. Nearly every region has been conquered. This region was never actually conquered. It became the sick man of Europe and became very weak, looked down on by the other nations, and even they realized it's because we don't allow freedom.